Tonight we are going to be talking about immigration and foreign policy. And I think that it's very important because there's breaking news that Donald Trump will be suing California because of sanctuary cities. Yeah, so it's very important. And so we have 5 candidates up here tonight who will be introduced later on by our moderator, Andrea Bird. And they're going to be discussing hard-hitting issues. You guys submitted questions to us. The ACLU submitted questions to us, and then also Bird Law Group created some questions with us, and we have some hard-hitting questions that look at the intersectional issues of immigration and of foreign policy. And I didn't want to start out tonight just with my words, but also with words of experts. So I'm going to invite to the stage Rashad. He is the founder and director of the American Arab Civil Union. So can we give him a round of applause? I said it wrong. Rashad, can you say what the organization is again? I did it wrong.
It's the Arab American Civic Council.
There we go. So Rashad is going to contextualize immigration and foreign policy in 3 minutes. Good luck.
Thank you, Aaron. So I got 3 minutes, so I'll get right into it. What if I lit your house on fire or paid someone to burn your house down, then locked the doors to prevent you from escaping? Then if somehow you managed to escape, I hired people to catch you and take you back to your burning house. And if you managed to make it to my backyard to seek shelter, I blamed you for ruining my house. That's our foreign policy, or at least that's how I see it. My late Palestinian grandmother was older than the state of Israel when she passed. Born in Jerusalem, the city Donald Trump declared the official capital of Israel, he did this despite the fact that under international law, East Jerusalem is not legally part of Israel. Trump can say what he wants to gain political points with Israel and its lobby in Washington, but my grandmother and I know who we are and where we come from. So with Israel being the single greatest beneficiary of American military assistance, receiving more than $3 billion from American taxpayers each year, despite its human rights abuses and illegal settlement expansion on occupied land. Why does so much of our tax dollars go to it, a country that doesn't need it, when in fact the largest refugee population was until a few years ago Palestinian, before the Syrian war started? Our foreign policy is responsible for displacing millions and creating refugees and veterans alike. Like my grandmother did, refugees escape war zones to survive. They don't leave their countries by choice. They leave because they're forced to. Donald Trump and his supporters accuse refugees of stealing jobs, ruining our culture, and destroying our society, while our government continues to start wars in various parts of the world. In the past 2 decades, the U.S. military operations under both Republican and Democratic administrations have brought death and destruction through direct wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and military intervention and proxy wars in Syria, in Yemen, in Somalia, Mali, Libya, and elsewhere. In Yemen, instead of bringing an end to the civil war, the U.S. provides targeted intelligence to the bombing campaign and assists with refueling coalition bombers, creating one of the worst man-made humanitarian crises to date. In Syria, instead of attempting to end the war, the U.S. helps prolong it by engaging in a proxy war for regional dominance. We clearly destroy countries, cultures, and jobs. Resettling refugees in the United States isn't only morally right, but it becomes an obligation. We have an administration that continues to launch wars while implementing travel bans on refugees and attempting to end temporary protected status for Syrians and Yemenis escaping war. Let's make it clear, foreign and domestic policies are not isolated from each other. Our bad foreign policy comes home to roost. If the US military didn't engage in too many foreign wars, we would have far less refugees and far less war veterans. Next, I want to introduce my fellow activist, Jessica Bravo, also a DACA recipient.
Thank you. So I want you all to think about your most beloved family members and keep that in mind throughout this candidate forum. And as I continue sharing with you all on immigration. So laws do not always reflect ethics and morals, right? They should be, but they don't always do so. And for that exact reason, it is our duty to ensure that our candidates are held to the highest standards because they are the ones that are pushing policy and laws that are affecting individuals every single day. It's not our immigrant community who we should fear. It is our elected officials who create policies that instill fear in all of you, that tell you that you should fear me because I am an immigrant. Immigration is a social dilemma, and we should be acting now. We should be ensuring that we're protecting our community. This country was founded by immigrants, although the history of that is completely different, right? But it is still important to understand that this country has thrived because of immigrants. So the moment we stop allowing immigrants to come, and the moment we stop allowing folks who are in this country and contributing to this country, we are doing ourselves a disservice. And so today, as we hear our candidates talk about their platforms and what they envision, I want all of you to ask them, what are you doing now? You don't need to be an elected official to take action. You can be doing everything possible to ensure that our immigrant communities, our refugees, folks that are mostly impacted by all these laws and policies are being protected. You don't have to be sitting in the White House to do that. So we need to ask and challenge all of the candidates today and ask them, what are you doing now? Your promises don't mean anything now, because if you're not doing anything now, how am I supposed to know, or how am I supposed to trust that you will be doing something once you get into that position? So keep that in mind, and I'm not sure if the candidates are in the room, but I would like to ask you, right? What are you doing to protect our immigrant communities? Here in California, we are blessed as immigrants, right? That there is such thing as folks believing in the humanity of us, right? And not fearing individuals like myself and creating sanctuary. But it's also important that we resist against administrations such as Trump that are trying to remove those protections. So I want all of you, again, to ask the candidates today, what are you doing now? What are you going, and how is that different from what you have done in the past and what you plan to do in the future? Because if we don't hold our elected officials to the highest standards, then how do we ensure and how do we trust that that loved one that you were thinking about is gonna be safe at the end of the day? Because as an immigrant, every day I fear deportation, and now in this administration, the fear has become more real. So for those elected officials that say they're not elected to represent immigrants, well, we're part of your district and we're contributing to your district just like anybody else. So we expect you all to also represent us because we also put into the system. So remember the question, what are you doing now to ensure that you're protecting us? And how do we know that once you're elected, you will continue with that promise? Oh, I'm supposed to introduce. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I totally forgot to. I would like to introduce Andrea Bird, former Marine. You're never a former Marine. Well, a retired Marine. I'm sorry. and a civil rights attorney.
Thank you. And can we have one more round of applause for both of our speakers? Thank you. All right. Good evening and welcome again to the debate. This is sponsored by Indivisible OC 48, the ACLU of Orange County, and Bird Law Group. The candidates tonight were invited based on their voter support scores, which we call the VSS. The VSS creates a score in which 70% of the candidates' total score measures their in-district support here in the 48th district. And when I say here in the 48th district, I don't actually mean here, because we're in Irvine, which is not in the 48th district. But here, as in those of us who are from the 48th district. We invited Congressman Rohrbacher. He did not respond to our kind invitation. I'm sure his thoughts are with us tonight. Thoughts and prayers are with us tonight from him, I'm sure. Closer? Oh, can you hear me better this way? All right. Unless I state otherwise tonight, candidates will have 60 seconds to respond to questions. I will then ask a follow-up question to which the candidates will have 30 seconds to respond. Several questions will be addressed to one candidate, and I will then give one or more other candidates the chance to respond. Those responses are also going to be limited to 30 seconds. And in the interest of time, we've asked that the candidates only add an additional response if their response would differ from the previous candidate's answers. Finally, tonight, we're trying something new. We're going to have 3 questions that are 2-candidate discussion questions. These 2 candidates will be given a discussion prompt, and we'll have 5 minutes to talk to each other about proposed legislative solutions, explain their ideology behind their proposals, and debate why their solutions are best. As the top VSS scorer, Mr. Harley Rouda will participate in 2 of those discussion questions. The rest of the candidates will participate in 1 each. As you all know, tonight's debate is about foreign policy and immigration. There are so many pressing issues in both of these areas, but we only have so much time that we can get to. We can't get to everything in one evening. So tonight we're really going to focus in on the topics we feel that congressional representatives have the most impact on. So our goal is to hear from the candidates about what concrete measures they can take in Congress to make change happen. Now, tonight, we welcome your applause when I announce each of the candidates and at the end. But instead of applauding or booing throughout the night, we ask that you use the green and red cards. Can you guys hold them up if you've got them? Nobody has green or red cards. Okay. So if you could just go ahead and do hands like this for applause, thumbs down for boos. Okay, everybody? Got it? Pull a McCain. So that way we can at least get the most time with our candidates to hear their answers to questions and get to ask the most questions that way. So thank you for your flexibility there. Now, without further delay, I'd like to welcome the candidates to the stage. From the lowest voter support score to the highest, I'd like you to please welcome first Michael Kotick. This is a long walk if you guys want to kind of, yeah. Yes. Thank you. And next we have Laura Oatman. Omar Siddiqui. Dr. Hans Keirstead. I'm sorry, Keirstead. Thank you, welcome. And finally, in first place in the VSS score is Harley Rouda. The candidates are now going to have 90 seconds each for opening statements. We'll hear them in VSS order, starting with Mr. Rouda.
Thank you, and thank you for, once again, OC Indivisible for hosting such a fantastic event. This is the second of 4 debates, and I really like the way they have set this up and given us an opportunity to cover such a broad range of topics. And immigration is such an important topic. And I'd like to start my comments with recognizing that with the exception of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, we are all immigrants, children of immigrants, or descendants of immigrants. From the early English, Spanish, and French explorers who came to the Americas, to the uncountable numbers of African Americans who were brought here against their will, to future nationalities from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Indonesia, Japan, China, and more recently from the Middle East and other areas. We have this incredibly diverse fabric of cultures that represent America. And one of the most amazing things is how we came here for so many different reasons. For me and my family, my dad's grandfather left what's called the Pale in Western Europe to avoid Jewish massacres known as pogroms. His father was born on a ship headed to New York City, and our family began its humble roots here in the United States back then. And like I said at the very beginning, we are all descendants of immigrants, just like you are, just like I am. I'm thrilled to be here to have this debate today.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Dr. Keirstead.
Well, good evening, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I came to this country as an immigrant myself, and I didn't have those hardships of this color of my skin, and I didn't have the hardships of coming here with no family. I didn't have the antagonism that this society bears on women, on somebody who is without language, LGBT communities. But it was a struggle for me. I can only imagine what it's like for DACA children and their families. You know, I have shown I have seen in the course of my 18 years in America that those doors of opportunities are being slammed. An individual like me today would not have been able to get the education that I had and the jobs that I had, and let alone if you're a minority population. And that just won't do. We have some change to make. And when we have 120 of the 435 districts in the United States experiencing gun massacres, we've got to do something. And when we're popping 120 tons of toxins into the air, we've got to do something. When inequality is there, we've got to do something. And I've been fighting big pharma, cancer, spinal cord injury my entire career.
Thank you,
I'll
Dr.
fight for
Keirstead.
you. Thank you.
We'll next hear from Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Omar Siddiqui, and I'm running for Congress in California's 48th District against Dana Russiabacker. I'm a Orange County native, born and raised in Southern California. I'm the son of immigrants. My father came to America in the 1950s, post-World War II, aboard the Queen Mary. I'm a trial lawyer, I'm an engineer, I'm a business owner, I'm an FBI National Security Director of Special Projects. I'm also a National Security Advisor and CIA partner as well. As an American Muslim and an FBI National Security expert, national security and immigration is a part of my daily life and occupation. I have the experience of working with leaders on national security matters. I am the lawyer that stood up and derailed President George Bush's unconstitutional domestic spy program known as Operation Flex. I have debated national security with President Obama. I've brainstormed policy with Secretaries of State, FBI Director Comey, and CIA Director Brennan. I have worked with numerous representatives and ambassadors on policy issues. For my work, I've received numerous awards from Congress, from the U.S. House of Representatives, the California State Assembly, the Department of Justice, the FBI, including the FBI's highest award, the Director's Leadership Award. We need a congressman who knows national security, not a congressman like Dana Rohrabacher, who's a national threat. I'm a problem solver.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Oatman?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Andrea. I'm Laura Oatman. I am an architect, environmental activist, a small business owner, a SoCal native, a daughter of Scottish immigrants, and I want to represent you next year in Orange County. First of all, I want to address the elephant in the room. There's a lot of chatter on Facebook about, oh my gosh, there's too many Democrats. We're going to split the vote. We need to unite behind one candidate, right? Is anybody in this room kind of worried about that? Well, let me put your mind at rest. Friday is the filing deadline. And if there was going to be another strong Republican in this race, we would have known it by now, unless there's going to be some really strange shenanigans going on, which I wouldn't put past the Republican Party. But we're probably looking at 2 names on the ballot in November. Dana Rohrabacher, and one of the 5 of us standing up here. And any one of the 5 of us is going to do a much better job than Dana Rohrabacher. Can I agree with that? Can you agree with that? Right? So don't worry. You're going to see 17 names on the ballot. 17 and counting. There might be 10 more by next week. But I don't think there's going to be another strong Republican. So really, this is going to be an interesting race. So lose that fear. Choose the person that best represents you, the local, the small business owner.
Thank you.
Choose Laura Oatman. Thank you.
Mr. Kotick?
Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I'm going to get this all. I don't have a, it's not really, it's like a trick. My name is, I'm just going to do this. My name is Michael Kotick. I have shared a lot with everyone here tonight about my background, but in specific, in regards to foreign policy and in regards to immigration, I feel like I want to add a little bit more texture. I am a first-generation American. I think we will definitely get into that a little bit deeper in the context of this debate. But my business experience is fundamentally different than anyone else up here. So I have an economics degree. I have a master's in business administration, but I also have a master's in global management. And that has enabled me to fundamentally engage in a different type of career. I have negotiated trade deals for companies for a complex global supply chain in Asia. I have helped business-related human rights violations be solved through business practices. I have done these things, I have had these practices, and as we sit here today with a president that is looking at putting together a trade war, that fundamental experience is important. I will also build upon Laura's comments and say that there is a lot of fear about splitting the vote. What I will tell you is that next week, we will be releasing a poll that we actually did, that we received a top-line result for a little earlier today. Vote splitting is not a problem. You have the freedom to pick the candidate that represents you. So I will say, please sign up on the website. We will be emailing results for that poll.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to the questions. This first question is going to be for all candidates, and you'll each have 60 seconds to answer. We're going to go in order of VSS score. So starting with Mr. Rouda, what is the biggest foreign threat to the United States, and how, as our congressional representative, do you propose to protect the U.S. from that threat?
Donald Trump and impeach him. I do believe Donald Trump is the greatest threat to our security right now. His behavior, his character or lack thereof, his constant prodding and childlike behavior is not acceptable for the presidency of the United States. We have gone from no drama Obama to more drama than anybody ever thought the president of the United States could bring upon us. Our standing in international community has never been lower. And
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. What's the biggest foreign threat?
The biggest foreign threat, I think, is Russia. And I think Russia is the biggest foreign threat because they continue to jeopardize the foundation of our democratic system by bringing our elections and our democracy into question.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Dr. Keirstead.
Well, certainly President Trump is one hell of a big threat. But I think more pressing than President Trump is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity threat to this nation is the #1 means of crippling our voter truthfulness and accountability. It's the #1 way of crippling our economy. It's the #1 way of crippling the way we communicate for safety. It is a threat that is involving the private sector because we have an infrastructure that's largely private. The lines are owned by companies. The servers are owned by companies. And so we need a strong private-public partnership in order to deter that threat so we don't have shenanigans like Russia knocking on our front door.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui?
Thank you. The #1 threat is Dana Rohrabacher. What I'm going to do about it is I'm going to run for office, like President Obama suggested that I do, that we be the change that we seek.
Mr. Siddiqui, again, a foreign threat, biggest foreign threat.
Foreign threat. I also agree that Russian interference with our democracy and our elections is a major foreign threat, along with terrorism by international groups. I also believe a major threat that we're seeing in the news a lot lately is the threat of nuclear missiles from North Korea.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Oatman?
You took my answer. I was going to say that before anybody else did. Well, of course, Donald Trump, of course, but he's not foreign, though he's definitely alien. Kim Jong-un is almost as unstable as our president. And when the two of them are comparing the size of their buttons on Twitter, it really makes me worried, especially when they're talking about getting intercontinental ballistic missiles in North Korea, where they could potentially launch a nuclear warhead and hit us here in District 48. And I will always be looking out, when I'm looking at the world stage and I'm looking at what's going on in the world and what kind of dangers are out there, what directly impacts us here in District 48. As someone who's lived here since 1976, I have a deep love for this community, and I want to protect it for all it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kotick?
So we spent, I think we're planning to spend about $600 billion, is that right, on our armed forces to make sure we're upgrading our equipment. And that's important. It is, because we've been at war for 17 years. We've been at war since I've been a sophomore in college. Let's be clear at how long this is. The issue is not that we're investing that money, it's the fact that we are fighting old wars. I think the biggest global threat is the fact that we are seeing Russian meddling, we're seeing allocation of funds to help go against anti-propaganda efforts, go against social media efforts, go against threatening our infrastructure, and we're not seeing this administration spend it. I would also say that even more fundamentally is the fact that we're short-sighted to think that Russian interference is actually our biggest issue. Attacks on infrastructure, attacks on servers, attacks on centralized data sources. We need to rethink every part of our digital infrastructure to make sure that our life is protected.
Thank you. This next question is for Mr. Rouda. And again, for individual questions, you'll have 60 seconds to answer, and I'll ask a follow-up, to which you'll have 30 seconds to respond. Where and how do you think U.S. military force and technology can be used most effectively abroad?
In 90 seconds, 60 seconds?
60 seconds.
Well, as Michael pointed out, we spend about $600 billion a year in military spending, which is more than the next 7 nations in the world combined. And we do need to have a strong military. Strong military controls the sea lanes and the air lanes, which also controls international trade and the ability to protect our country here as well as our citizens abroad. And I would fully support still having the strongest military. How we spend that money can be done a few different ways, and I'm not an expert compared to those that are in the military. But we certainly need to project our ability to protect American interest abroad. That being said, we also get involved in conflicts that are not where the United States should be spending its energy. We have to first and foremost start with supporting democracies and human rights across the world. And by doing that, we will have a safer and secure world for us as well as everyone.
And what particular conflicts would you recommend we get out of?
Well, I didn't want to see us go into Iraq. And I think the nation building that we've done in the Middle East in general has not served us well. And we have repeated that issue over history. We have certainly at times done exactly the right thing, like we did in World War II and World War I. But Vietnam War is another example where, in hindsight, I'm not sure that was the right place for us to go.
Thank you. Next question's for Dr. Keirstead. Reconstruction from damage done during the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan totaled roughly $2.4 trillion. At the same time, perpetual underfunding has allowed the VA's infrastructure to erode, and about 3.9 million veterans, which is more than 1 in 5 veterans, are living paycheck to paycheck. When budgeting for war, what responsibilities does Congress have to budget for the care after war?
Very, very good question. You know, I feel that President Trump has abdicated his role as commander-in-chief to a group of generals. And that is just killing and crippling our foreign policy. You know, we've got, over the last year, we have put 4,000 more troops in Afghanistan and tripled the bombs. In Somalia, we've doubled the troops and doubled the bombs. In Syria, we've 4 times the troops. No, sorry, from 92 to 1762. And doubled the bombs. This can't go on. What we need to be doing is a more effective look at where we deploy our forces rather than deferring to generals who are doing it for us, which have a vested interest in deploying according to their own payback. So taking care of our VA, taking care of the policies that prevent these individuals from getting care that they need, the security that they need, preventing them from the homelessness that they're experiencing day to day.
So as the follow-up question then, what specific legislation would you, and budgeting would you propose to account for war reconstruction and for taking care of our veterans after they're out of the military?
It would be enhancing the care of veterans after they get back. So that would be the provision of care in the VA system, but expanding the VA system to care beyond the means of the VA system. We have a lot of our veterans wanting care outside of it for mental disorders, and they're not able to get it because the VA does not extend beyond that.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui, military readiness is the ability of individual units in the armed forces to execute their assigned missions promptly and competently. What do you see as the biggest issues facing our troops, and what will you do in Congress to address those issues?
Excellent question as well. Having worked with the FBI and the CIA, I can say the biggest problem we have is leadership that knows that war should be used as a last resort. We have too many leaders who are willing to put the lives of the troops ahead of diplomacy. And that is something that I'm very proud that President Obama and the FBI did, along with the CIA, very carefully. Also, what we need to do is to ensure that we use the avenue of the United Nations and we use the avenue of diplomacy first and use war as a last means. Another thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that what we're putting our troops and sons and daughters and their lives on the line, we have to make sure that it's a cause that is important to world safety and world peace.
So along with the troop readiness, we also want to make sure that the troops know that they'll be taken care of when they retire and that they'll be taken care of while they're in the armed services. Do you believe that gender affirmation treatment should be covered for active duty and for veterans?
Well, I really do believe that we need legislation that protects and covers our veterans when they return. Our military needs to be gender neutral. I strongly disagree with President Trump's attempts to remove the LGBTQ+ community from the military. Everyone and anyone who wants to serve our nation should have the right to be able to do so.
And do you support the government actually paying for the gender affirmation treatment for vets and for currently serving?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. This next question is from Ms. Oatman. And I'm going to ask the rest of you a follow-up as well, so pay attention. As you know, Congress has the constitutional authority to budget for war. I'm going to give you 3 hypothetical situations. Under which of these situations, if any, would you support the use of U.S. military force abroad? Hypothetical A is an attack on U.S. soil resulting in significant casualties. Hypothetical B is an attack on the soil of one of our close allies, resulting in the death of a U.S. national. Hypothetical C is a foreign state that, if left unchecked, could use weapons of mass destruction against the United States. Do you need me to repeat any of those? Okay. So the question is, which of those three hypothetical circumstances would you support the use of U.S. military force abroad?
Are you talking about unilateral U.S. military force or working with our allies, or is that?
Well, that's up to you to answer the question that way, if that's how you would answer it. But
okay.
Question A was an attack on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
Question B was an attack on our ally, and if you say that, if your answer is that you want it to be with the ally, then
yeah,
that's your
I guess
answer.
okay. Are we started? Timing?
Time now.
Okay. Yes, I am a firm believer that war should always be the last resort, that we need to move away from unilateral military action of any kind and emphasize diplomacy over military action at all costs with clear goals. When we do go in for military action, we need to have clear goals, a stated budget, how much money we're going to spend, how much time we're going to spend there, and what is the reason we're going to be there. And I am completely against any sort of unilateral action without working with our allies. So definitely an attack on U.S. soil would require a military response. That there's no question about it. A close ally as well. It would require a military response. However, the third was attack on a foreign national.
The third was a foreign state that, if left unchecked, could
Yes.
use weapons of mass destruction against the United States.
Well, no, I would not support an attack on a foreign state. I would support everything that we could possibly do in terms of peaceful negotiations, working with our allies in that region to prevent war from occurring.
That was part of the follow-up question, too.
Okay,
Count it.
sorry.
So, are you saying that you would not vote on to fund a preemptive strike?
No, I would not vote on that.
And I'm going to ask each of you just to quickly go through. You've got 30 seconds each to say which of those A, B, and C, which of those you would support the use of military force abroad. So we'll start with Mr. Kotick.
So quickly running through a couple pieces, then I want to have some clarity here. Attack on U.S. soil, absolutely. Close ally with a U.S. national casualty, absolutely. With the foreign state that has nuclear weapons. I think it's important to look at the definition of preemptive, which is that there is an anticipation of an imminent threat. And that is important because what that requires is that requires intelligence. So I think my answer is, what is the intelligence? And that also underscores our need to start trusting and elevating our intelligence community again to make sure we're making good decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui?
Thank you. I agree that an attack on U.S. soil does warrant action, as well as B, an attack on an ally pursuant to our relationships with NATO. The third one, C, is a little tricky because it does depend on not only an imminent threat, but in real life situations, what is the actual clear and present danger that warrants the action? In a situation like that, the White House, along with national security advisors, would look at the degree of force necessary to neutralize the threat. That is a standard that we have used, that I have used and advised the highest levels of government.
Thank you. Dr. Keirstead?
I think our foreign policy has to have three priorities of checking weapons of mass destruction, of countering jihadi movements, and thirdly, strengthening our international standards for peacekeeping. So I'd be certainly yes on the first two, and the second would depend on the intelligence. Again, my knee-jerk to that would be no, as we're not going to war with North Korea at present.
And Mr. Rouda?
On attack on U.S. soil, if it was a nation-sponsored attack, then yes. If it was rogue parties from another nation state, that's nuanced, and we would have to think through that. An attack on an ally, we have a requirement under NATO to come to the support of our allies. So if the allies required and requested our support, then yes, we would stand there shoulder to shoulder with them. Nuclear threat, mass destruction, that is very nuanced. Under that situation, what I'd first like to see is that we remove first strike nuclear capability from the hands of the President of the United States and make that an act of Congress.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
This next question is for Mr. Kotick. In 2016, 14.1% of Department of Defense women and 2% of Department of Defense men indicated experiencing gender discrimination in the past 12 months. Compared to 2014, there was a statistically significant increase in the rate of gender discrimination for DoD women of 1.7 percentage points. The military has its own internal review system, which leaves it open to higher rates of sexual assault and harassment when compared to the general public. What role does Congress play in decreasing these numbers? Sorry, ignore all the numbers and just let me ask you the real question. What would you do in Congress to decrease sexual assault and harassment in the military?
Well, I think first and foremost, I always believe that leadership starts at the top. So I think we need to make sure that there is a high standard, both in Congress and in the executive branch, that we are setting example for the men and women in uniform, first and foremost. Second of all, I think we need to make sure that we hold the generals and the Joint Chiefs accountable for expedient process and make sure that there is fairness and that there is justness in those measures. I also believe that we need to make sure that we increase our reporting. So if we think about it, there is numerous cases now of sexual assault being conducted by men and women in uniform, it not being reported, and those people being honorably discharged and then committing a crime, such as we saw of gun violence here just a couple of months ago. I think it's important that we make sure that we are not only getting people to act in accordance and in honor with the people who are in uniform, but also once they are discharged, that continues as well.
And as a follow-up, what are the tangible legislative solutions that you would do? I know you say that we would like the generals to do better, but would you suggest that we rework the whole system so that there's a different way of reporting sexual assault and harassment? Or do you just want to hold people to a different standard? What's your solution?
Well, I think they just need to be held to the same standard. And I think that's the problem that is being permeated today. And I think that there are legislative measures that need to take place. I am not an expert in the armed forces. I think we'd have to make sure that we have the experts in the room to ensure that we're doing that. But knowing the problem, as you stated it, that's something we should absolutely look at in Congress.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to our first two-candidate discussion question. This first one's going to be for Mr. Siddiqui and Ms. Oatman. And as a reminder, you're going to have 5 minutes right now to discuss the question between the two of you.
Hey, Omar.
Hi, Laura.
All right. Here's the question.
Congress you would put me against the foreign policy expert. Thank you. Just say.
Congress has limitations on how its members can affect foreign policy. What can you do as a congressperson to affect foreign policy goals? Discuss.
Laura, would you like to start?
No.
Okay. I will then.
Thank you.
One thing that a Congress person or representative should do is to make sure to maintain a close working relationship with various chiefs of staff, various other representatives, and the White House. What we have now, unfortunately, is a situation where Congress cannot even function together. There are bills that are being written in private. So what needs to happen to engage in foreign policy and to address these critical issues of national security is there needs to be a better working dialogue. One thing that I want to emphasize is when I was working with, and am still working with the FBI, one thing that I did do is even though I was working with the Obama administration, Democrat, Director Comey himself was Republican, but it didn't matter. The emphasis here was it doesn't matter if you're red Republican or blue Democrat, we're red, white, and blue at the end, and we have to put our national security first. That's something that's critical that I think we're forgetting and getting divided upon.
Hey, Omar, did you ever have a chance to work with our lovely Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who I understand is the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Emerging Threats Subcommittee?
Well,
did you have an opportunity to speak with him about Russia at all?
He's too busy in Russia to talk to me or take my phone calls. But what I can tell you is I did have a meeting with Dana Rohrabacher several years ago after there was a major earthquake in Pakistan. And that was about an issue about ensuring that the close alliance that we have with Pakistan and in the Middle East region was soft and secure. Unfortunately, Congressman Rohrabacher was too busy worrying that Congresswoman Linda Sanchez was at that same meeting as opposed to wanting to address those issues. That was several years ago, well before I thought I was going to be, knew I was going to be running for Congress, but that always struck a nerve with me that he was there for himself. He was there more for his time there as opposed to what he should have been doing, which is engaging us on formulating appropriate national policy.
How are we on time there? 2:35. Continue.
Okay, well, you know, one thing that I believe I can bring to the table once I get to Congress, Omar, is I think we are completely underrepresented in terms of women in Congress. We are more than 51% in the population, and yet less than 1 in 5 in Congress are women. And I believe that women look at things a little differently. I think we look at that budget where 56 cents of every dollar is going to the military, and we think, my God, why are we doing that? We don't need to be spending all of our federal tax dollars on war. So as a woman in Congress, I believe we're going to be looking at refiguring that Trump tax plan, that recent budget that was just passed, where he actually increased the military budget by $100 billion a year, which is absurd and obscene. We should be spending that money on schools and public education and health care and mental health and all of the things that women tend to want to spend our federal dollars on.
Well, Laura, I'll say that making sure money goes to the right place is an American thing, maybe not so much a gender issue. One thing that bothers me a lot is when I hear that Sarah Palin should be president of the United States, or Sarah Palin should be ambitious. She is unfortunately not someone who I think has the right direction for our country. But what I think is critical is that we get the right people, regardless of their gender, regardless of their national origin, regardless of their skin color or what their name is. We need people who inspire leadership and that we have a lot of confidence in. Barack Hussein Obama was someone that we all respected, and we didn't lose sleep at night knowing that he was holding the nuclear football.
Anything else?
Absolutely.
You have a few seconds left on this. Okay, we'll move on.
Laura, your oatmeal cookies are fantastic.
Thank you. They're vegan.
Save me another.
Okay, this next question is for Mr. Rouda. According to Homeland Security Department officials, Russian hackers targeted 21 U.S. state election systems in the 2016 presidential race. While a small number were breached, there is no evidence at this time that any votes were manipulated. Do cyber attacks count as an act of war, and what is the appropriate response?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
Certainly, it's an attempt to diminish our democracy, and we have to treat it with utmost respect in addressing that issue. Whether it rises to the level of an act of war, I'm not ready to go there, because I would imagine that our government has also been known to try and tap into other networks around the world. So I don't think we can jump there. What we need to do is secure our system to make sure that foreign governments cannot hack not just our voting procedures, but also implement bot systems that take advantage of our social media platforms that spread around fake news. We have to hold the social platforms to the same level of accountability that we do firms and media. And that means that they have the ability to cite and pull off fake news through their algorithms. They need to be held accountable to do just that.
And with an administration that's disinterested in addressing this national security issue, what can you do as a representative in Congress about it?
There's a lot you can do about it. And you hit the nail on the head. The money that has been set aside for the U.S. Intelligence agencies to take on the cybersecurity of our voting system has yet to be spent, has yet to be authorized by the President of the United States on what direction to go. So as a member of Congress, what we need to do is bring pressure on the President by mobilizing you. That's why I'm committed to having town halls and engaging the electorate to make sure you know what the issues are, you're engaged in those issues, and you're fighting to make sure your elected officials are held accountable.
Thank you. Dr. Keirstead, we spoke about the hidden costs of war earlier. Since March 2011, at least 738 Syrian doctors, nurses, and medical aides have died in more than 360 attacks on medical facilities, according to the Physicians for Human Rights. Do you believe we have an obligation to displaced persons to ensure that they receive sufficient medical care?
Absolutely. You know, it's easier for us to sell guns to third world nations than it is for us to receive their refugees. And that just won't do. We can't stand for that. We have an obligation to provide care to all of those refugees that we are actually responsible for putting into place to any degree whatsoever. If we see an influx of refugees coming from a war-torn area, humanity says we need to be serving those people. If it's on that soil, then we need to do it right there. And we need to welcome them in and to provide them with a pathway to citizenship if we are responsible in any way, shape, or form for those individuals having to flee their countries due to hardships.
And what can we do about it in Congress? How do you pay for it?
Well, Congress is the purse, and so we allocate funds for that. We can also allocate funds for the immigration and lawful registration of those individuals into our countries, into our country.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Siddiqui, is the current military budget of $597 billion reflective of the threats to the United States and our international military obligations?
Absolutely not. The amount that we spend on our military is significantly higher than the next 7+ nations. That in itself is an issue. That money should be allocated for education, single-payer health care. It should be allocated for infrastructure, cybersecurity protections as well.
And what would you cut from the budget, from the military budget?
Well, right now I think one thing that we should stop spending significant money on are direct attack bombers. We have plenty of bombers that are not being used. There does not need to be any additional military spending on additional aircraft, artillery, or submarines or attack mechanism. One thing that we're noticing right now, we are facing a different type of war with a different type of enemy like ISIS.
And I'm going to ask the rest of the candidates a 30-second version of that question, which is the budget the right amount for the military? And what would you cut from the military or add to it? Or where would you spend the money? You've got 30 seconds. And we'll start with Mr. Rouda.
It's difficult to answer that question, and here's why. None of us are qualified to. And you can make an argument that it's not enough money, or you can make an argument that it's too much money. In my opinion, it's too much money in relationship to the other things that our country needs to address. Now, if we had extra money and running a surplus budget, would I be in support of potentially spending more on military spending because there was a justifiable reason to do so? Perhaps, but I would need to see the data. The war of yesterday is not going to be the war of tomorrow. And we need to recognize that the weapons that will be needed to protect our country and our interests are going to be very different than what we are accustomed to.
Thank you. Dr. Keirstead?
We need more oversight on spending in the military. So the $400 nail has now become the $70 nail, but that's a damn expensive nail. And we just can't be handing contracts willy-nilly to best friends. Harley, you're right in that the war of tomorrow is not the war of yesterday. And so we really do have to modernize for that and equip in intelligence in a far greater manner and diplomacy in a far greater manner than actually our weapons and tanks.
Ms. Oatman?
I agree with everything that my colleagues have said. Basically, we are spending way too much money on military hardware of the past. We seem like we're ramping up for World War III here, and it is completely unnecessary. We don't need more aircraft carriers, more warplanes. There's a different type of war being fought, and it is cybersecurity, fought with drones. It's a much lighter, more nimble, unfortunately, and kind of an uglier type of a warfare, but it is cheaper, too. We don't need that money. We need it for veterans.
Mr. Kotick?
Let me provide a different perspective. The issue and the reason why these spending bills are so expensive is because we keep kicking the can down the road and we can't agree on a budget. There is too much partisanship. And every single time we do not agree on a budget, it becomes more expensive because we are signing up for year over year over year spending deals as opposed to long-term deals. I will also say that our veterans, or I'm sorry, not our veterans, our active service members do deserve pay raises, and we are going on to a platform where it is going to be shape-shifting warfare. We are going to see cyber, and we need to be thinking differently.
Thank you. Ms. Oatman, this next question's for you. In the wake of Russia's intervention in the 2016 election and the Putin regime's support of anti-American cyber terrorists, what action do you suggest the U.S. take against Russia, if any?
Well, it would be nice if the money that has been allocated to actually study this Russian cyber intervention would be actually spent on figuring out what was going on during that hacking. There's Admiral Michael Rogers, who is the head of U.S. Cyber Command, sitting on all that money, waiting for President Trump's go-ahead to say, yes, we need to aggressively go into this, figure out where these cyber attacks are coming from, and stop them before these 2018 midterm elections, which are just around the corner. And he has not done a thing about that. So what we need to do is we need a brand new Congress. We need to flip 24 seats from red to blue and get some Democrats in there that can restore some sanity to this government. Because right now, it's a pretty low bar, but we're just asking for sanity at this point. But there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that our election systems are more safe. We can go to paper ballots. We can go to, it's slipping my, sorry. There's things we can do.
Sure, and as a follow-up, how do you propose that be enforced? That these proposals be enforced. If somebody's sitting on the money, if Trump is sitting on the money, how do we make them spend it? As a congressperson, how do you do that?
Well, we need to make sure that President Trump does not have the power to sit on all of this stuff. We need to, as a Congress, have the ability to come together with a committee and say, look, this money needs to be spent, and we need to be working with our FBI and the CIA and all of our intelligence community to recognize that Donald Trump, in fact, might be a threat to our national security himself.
Thank you. And Mr. Kotick, Congresswoman Betty McCollum introduced a bill to Congress titled Promoting Human Rights by Ending Israeli Military Detention of Palestinian Children Act, H.R. 8391, designed to prevent United States tax dollars from supporting the Israeli military's ongoing detention of Palestinian children. Is it our place to restrict U.S. tax dollars from flowing to our allies based on human rights concerns?
Give me all the tough ones, huh? Mm-hmm. So I think it's important. I'm gonna lead up to it because I think I have some time to do it.
You do.
It's important to recognize that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is incredibly complex. And it's incredibly complex in the sense that U.S. actions are continuing to make it more complex every single day. So I don't have an issue with the embassy in Jerusalem, but the problem is that it threw another thing in the middle of a peace process. So to answer your question, should we be looking at whether U.S. tax dollars should go to Israel in exchange and make sure that human rights violations are not taking place? I absolutely think we should look at it. But I also think we get things from Israel that are really important. We got post-9/11 security protocols from Israel. We have desalinization technology that came from Israel. There's a lot of things that are coming, so I don't think it's as cut as dry as A for B. I think what we do need to do is we need to make sure that someone other than Jared Kushner is going in there and talking about a peace process.
So as a follow-up, and I understand you haven't read every proposed bill out there because...
How'd you guess?
You have probably other things to do. But would you support a bill that this particular bill, like I said, it's about the Israeli military's ongoing detention of Palestinian children. So this only specifically is about children being detained and, according to the bill, mistreated. Would you support a bill like that?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, next question. Mr. Siddiqui, in the women's issues debate, you mentioned the no-fly list. What are the major issues you see with the no-fly list?
Well, I work extensively with the no-fly list, and the problem is that it's very subjective. Just because you have a name doesn't mean that you are linked to a particular identity. For example, if you have a particular name and that name matches someone else who's on the no-fly list, well, there's no ID that's linked to you or your social security or your date of birth. It's just a name. There are numerous names on this no-fly list that don't belong there, and that's problematic.
And what, as a congressperson, could you do to fix that?
Well, I think the problem is that because the whole no-fly list is prepared somewhat ad hoc, it's not prepared with great scrutiny. What needs to happen is there needs to be a division within the Department of Homeland Security that investigates each individual, and there be a way for individuals who are on the list to appeal that. Right now, it's a very difficult process. In Congress, I will formulate a plan to ensure that there is a way to address if you're on that no-fly list.
Okay, and I'm being told by all of my fact checkers here that I messed up just now. And I was supposed to ask everybody on the stage the question that I asked you, Michael. So we're not just targeting.
See how it is.
See, you don't get. You're not the only one with the hard questions. So just to go back and repeat, and all we'd like you to answer is just, would you support a bill like this? You've got 30 seconds to answer. And we'll start with Mr. Rouda.
No, I would not.
You would not support a bill?
I would not support it because we need to support our allies. And if we're going to tie our support to allies to absolute human rights violations and support, then we really need to look right here in the United States at all the human rights violations that take place every single day and point the finger at ourselves. When we address our human rights issues, then I think we can be a little bit more forceful. And more importantly, we've got a lot better chance getting the right behavior out of the countries through a strong State Department and diplomacy versus passing bills in Congress along those lines.
Okay. Dr. Keirstead?
You know, I think we've got a leadership vacuum happening in the world right now, in that the United States was a leader in foreign policy, and now we are not. We are actively denigrating our foreign policy in our administration, and we've got a very racist, outward-looking policy right now. And I don't think we should be holding up our own values for other nations. We should be setting an example. So I would support, an ethical approach to dealing with this type of misbehavior. Absolutely.
So you would say yes on the bill?
Yes, I would.
Mr. Siddiqui?
Well, to be clear, Israel is our strong ally and has been and still needs to continue to be. However, when our allies, even if they're our allies, they do something that compromises human rights, I think what a good ally does is we tell our allied nations that human rights violations are occurring. Whether it's Israel or Saudi Arabia with the treatment of women, we have to tell our allies that's unacceptable, and we need to work with our allies to correct a wrong. It's about human rights with our allies and our democracy and our foundation.
And Ms. Oatman?
Yeah, Omar, I'm taking you to D.C. with me when I'm the next congresswoman here, because we're just on the same page on so many ways. We need to have bold leadership that is not afraid to stand up to enemies and allies alike. If they are doing something that is not morally correct, America needs to take leadership. America needs to remain the moral leader in this world. So, Saudi Arabia, we give them tens of millions of dollars and they start to bomb Yemen. We've got to say no. In this case, also, I would vote yes on this particular bill that's going to help the Palestinian children.
Can we just be clear, though, that literally what they just all agreed to is cutting off all foreign aid and military aid to every single ally in the world has the possibility of occurring.
Well, let's give everybody a chance to respond. Is that what you meant by your answer? And we'll start with Mr. Kotick.
No, I think what I was, as I acknowledged,
10 seconds each.
As I acknowledged earlier, I have not read that bill, so I would like to see it. But on the premise of understanding if we should hold people accountable for human rights violations, I think the answer is yes, but I'd like to read the bill further.
Mr. Siddiqui?
No, what Mr. Rouda is saying is incorrect. What I'm saying is very clear, is that before money can go to any of our allies, we need to make sure our allies are operating within the confines of human rights.
And to be clear, if there are human rights violations and bills are going to be passed to preventing military and foreign aid, you're saying we will cut it off if they have any kind of human rights violations?
Well, this particular question was about children.
Exactly.
So if we're looking right now at abuse of children, mistreatment of children, and detaining of children, then your answer is yes, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and Dr. Keirstead?
Yeah, 4391
Keirstead.
regards specifically detained, abused Palestinian children. And so I'm absolutely for that, yeah.
Okay, and Ms.
The bill,
Oatman?
I mean.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm somewhat familiar with the bill, but I don't know it in detail to know what else is tied to it. But absolutely, in theory, I will stand strong against any ally that is going to be abusing children.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Oatman, this next question is for you as well. According to the Harvard Business Review, the U.S. is the extreme counter-argument to the myth of trickle-down. While incomes grew by more than 600% for the top 0.001% of Americans since 1980, the bottom half of the population was actually shut off from economic growth with a close to zero rise in their yearly income. In Europe, growth among the top 0.001% was 5 times lower than in the US, but the poorest half of the population fared much better, experiencing a 26% growth in their average incomes. All that is to say, what will you do in Congress to ensure that the future gains from free trade agreements similar to TPP or NAFTA would be distributed fairly?
Well, that's a great question.
Thank you.
Yes, income inequality is probably one of the largest challenges of our time, in addition to climate change, and I say that all the time. And so what we need to do is literally get a brand new Congress in place, a Congress that's going to be bold, that's going to be looking at how we can restructure our economy in such a way that is not going to be benefiting all of those billionaires and 0.01 percenters, and starting to look at how we can best invest in those of us in the middle class and the working class. And it's a complex process. Of course, there's a lot of pieces to that, but enforcing and assisting labor, making sure that we have a $15 or a living wage tied to inflation, helping labor to make sure that they are strengthened and that the rights are not taken away with this right to work law that is taking place, and helping to strengthen those of us that are working class and middle class.
And would you have voted to support TPP?
No, I would not have voted to support TPP. I think that trade, in theory, sounds good on paper sometimes, but the reality is it was making the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We need to make sure that most of our jobs now should be in America. We need to keep it home. We need to make sure that anything that we can do and build here in America, that we are making it here in America.
Thank you. This next question is for Mr. Kotick, but I'm also going to ask the follow-up 30-second to Mr. Rouda and Dr. Keirstead. Declaring war is a constitutional power of Congress, but in practice since the Korean War, presidential administrations have used U.S. troops for military intervention by executive order. If elected to Congress, how would you work to reclaim congressional constitutional authority over the U.S. military activity?
I think one of the biggest things that Congress needs to do is a new authorization to use military force. There hasn't been a renewal in quite some time, and there needs to be some clear rules that are outlined that are not currently outlined in the current legislation. First and foremost, I think we need to have a sunset on it. So it's not an indefinite authorization, it has a time limit for renewal. Second of all, I think there needs to be clarity. When can we move swiftly? Obviously against imminent threats, but also things like terrorist attacks and terrorist networks across the world are something that we absolutely can move swiftly on. The one thing that needs to come forward is that we need to have Congress alerted and even the American public alerted if we were going to commit ground troops to any effort. I don't know about you, but when I saw the casualties that happened in Niger, my first reaction was, what are we doing there? And when we don't know where we're sending our men and women in uniform, I think that's a significant problem. So I would support Adam Schiff's authorization to use military force on the floor.
And How would you go about in D.C. convincing others to vote with you on this issue?
I mean, I think the authorization of military force is a bipartisan supported issue. I don't think there's an issue with this particular problem. I think the issue is with that fact that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell won't put it on the floor.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same question to Mr. Rouda.
The Constitution provides that the declaration of war resides with Congress. And certainly aspects of control over that has been relegated to the presidency, which in times makes sense if it is an immediate concern, an immediate threat, and it needs an immediate response. But an ongoing, continued response has to be approved and handled by Congress, and we need to dial it back and give Congress the appropriate control over the presidency of the United States in putting forth armed forces across the world.
And Dr. Keirstead.
Yes, certainly congressional authority is required. And when we saw the Trump administration retaliation to the chemical attacks recently, that was actually an abuse of presidential authority, and he skirted the congressional requirements. We have to work with the administration in a bipartisan manner to hold the administration accountable so those abuses do not happen. Congressional authority exists. It needs to be backed up.
Thank you. We're now going to do our next two-candidate discussion. And this one will be between Mr. Rouda and Dr. Keirstead. Again, 5 minutes, discuss amongst yourselves. I'll intervene if you get too far off topic. Given the current administration's agenda and history, how can you as a congressperson in a Republican-controlled House, Senate, and White House help the undocumented community on a national scale? Discuss.
Well, I'll start. You know, 60% of immigration detention centers are owned by 2 corporations. 60% of them in the United States. Those 2 corporations had their rights taken away under Obama, and they received them from Trump after each of them paid the Trump campaign $250,000. That's a little known fact. So one of the things that we need to do is get in the way of that. You know, this corporate money into politics is killing the nation, and in this particular instance, it's a crime against proper immigration standards and proper handling of our immigrants.
I think the issue, the crux that we're trying to get to is how can we address, to me, what is one of the most important issues on the table, and that is Dreamers, DACA, and how do we move that forward. In a previous debate of the candidates up here, the question was asked, would you support Trump's $18 billion wall in exchange for a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers? And I said yes. And I'll tell you why I said yes. I said yes because I'm sick and tired of both parties holding the Dreamers hostage for other things that they want to accomplish. These kids were brought over here at an average age of 6, and I'm tired of party-first politics instead of putting their interest forward. Second reason I support it is because $18 billion to build a wall is not going to build a wall anytime soon, which means by the time we take back Congress, that $18 billion won't have been spent, and we can redirect it in the right way. And the third reason, which I find is the most hypocritical reason as to why we didn't take that deal, is the fact Senate Bill 744 was passed by the Senate 63 to 32, bipartisan support with a majority of the Democrats, which supported spending $46 billion for border security and port security across the United States. So if we got to give Trump to be able to hold up a piece of paper with his little hand saying he got $18 billion to build a wall, that we're going to redirect those funds down the road to bring those Dreamers in a pathway to citizenship, I'm behind it 100%.
So a couple things on the Dreamers as well. You know, I had some really interesting discussions recently with advocates of the community. And, you know, I really became aware of how Dreamers submitted all of their information, and then that information was then used to penalize that group. The Trump administration completely turned on those individuals, and not only putting them at risk, but putting their families at risk, and effectively pitting the children against their families. They know where they live. They can be deported. So this issue of DACA and Dreamers is larger than the children. And we have to broaden our views. We need to get rid of these bars, the 3-year, the 10-year, the permanent bars. We need to shorten our path to citizenship process with the family process and getting your family members in, the backlogs for pulling those in, and student visas and worker visas. Somebody with a visa that has come here to work and gets a degree, there needs to be a path rather than kicking that student out after they have worked hard here, brought their families here, grown children here. We had an immigration law, and it was rejected by the House in, I believe it was 2013, a comprehensive immigration law. We need to return to some sense there to get the comprehensive immigration laws passed in this nation.
Hans, you made a comment earlier about getting rid of the for-profit detention centers, and I agree with you completely. You also made comments at a Democratic Club speech, and I want to give you a chance to clarify your comments. You talked about tracking immigrants, and there was certainly a lot of backlash from immigrants about what that exactly means, that we would literally electronically track them as they moved across the country to get data on them. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks, Harley. You know, what I
That was heartfelt.
Yeah. No, really. It's I'm glad I got the opportunity. You know, when I mentioned tracking, bad word. What I was trying to get at was data. We need data on these individuals and the amount of contributions that they're having to our society. Contributions and quantifications like the $3 billion in tax dollars they put into California, like the $12 billion annually they put into Social Security without any opportunity to benefit from that Social Security, a program in our countries that is on the edge. So information. I then came to learn after talking to a couple brilliant young individuals that would actually, like I just told you about individuals getting screwed over by their ability to find out where they live.
Please go ahead and take an extra 30 seconds to continue answering.
Thank you very much. I found out that information gathering would put those individuals at risk. And so I completely retracted my idea of getting information on them that way. And I did post that online the day after I put it out. And I appreciate the individuals in the audience that helped me with that. So I'd love to get more information on them. Unfortunately, tagging them to get that information puts them at risk, and we cannot do that. These individuals are bearing enough risk. We cannot give them more.
Thank you. This next question is for Mr. Siddiqui. On January 31st of this year, the administration issued an order to continue using Guantanamo Bay as a prison and detention center for non-citizens alleged to be involved with terrorism. Would you support a bill to close Guantanamo Bay?
I was invited to attend a trial at Gitmo last year, and I was also invited to witness another trial that was occurring there. As a trial attorney, as a national security advisor, as someone who holds in high regard the Constitution of the United States, Gitmo must close. Gitmo violates the due process. It violates who we are as a country. It violates the very fundamental principles that our founding fathers put into play. It is unequivocal that one thing that I will champion to do in Congress is to make sure that we return to our values. One thing that's very important for me is, even though I do a lot of work with the FBI, I make sure that we do so within the confines of our law and our Constitution. We cannot compromise our values in what we're doing.
And what alternative approach would you take for criminal prosecution and incarceration of the detainees currently held there?
Excellent question. I think what's critical, and this is something I have suggested as well to the Department of Justice, is that we integrate any war criminals either in a due process military court or into our criminal justice system, our federal criminal justice system.
Thank you. And we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to not ask follow-up questions. We're going to stick to 60 seconds unless I absolutely, really, really want to hear your follow-up answer. So, next question is for Dr. Keirstead. U.S. allies, such as the UK and Australia, place immigrants into tiers based on education level, skills, income, etc. Would you support a similar program in the United States, and why or why not? And also, if you do support a similar program, how would you combat the systemic racism and classism tied to a tiered approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I did my postdoctoral fellowship in Cambridge, England, and I watched and I taught in that system. And students are plugged in at a very, very young age. And in my experience, it doesn't work. It is a system that robs the individual of their free choice, and they are forced down a path that may or may not be suited for them. And they end up being able to get out of that path after a very long, very expensive education. And in this country, we have an education cost that is so incredibly burdensome on students, with very little hope of them being able to pay off the costs of that education within a reasonable period of time. We cannot be forcing them. We must maintain a free choice.
Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Kotick. Do you believe in limiting the number of people allowed to immigrate into the United States? And if so, what limits do you believe are reasonable? And along with that, please let us know if you think we should have limits on the number of immigrants from specific countries of origin or other categories.
60 seconds, go.
60 seconds.
So I think it's important to talk about our visa process as a whole. And first of all, and the largest portion of our visas are awarded to family reunification. And I support that. When people are unified with their families, when they have a support network, when they actually have to go through the process of justifying the financial means to help support those people when they do come into the country, I think families are good. I think that's what this country is based on. That being said, there are a lot of other visas to mention earlier. There are visas around work, high skill, low skill. I think one of the biggest things that we have done is we have put numbers against these different categories that feel arbitrary and don't reflect the actual needs of the labor market here in the United States. That's what we need to be doing. We need to actually be working with business to assess demand for workers and make sure that's reflected in our visa process, because I will tell you the undocumented immigrant population here is filling a void that is actually not being represented by our visa process, and that's something that we need to correct in comprehensive immigration reform.
Mr. Rouda.
Yes.
The Supreme Court recently overturned a Ninth Circuit decision that required periodic bail hearings for ICE detainees. This decision came out last week. Further, the administration has requested additional funding to detain more immigrants facing deportation. Should limits be placed on the length of time someone can be detained without a hearing?
Absolutely. It was a horrible decision, and Congress needs to take it up and address it. Under the Constitution of the United States, all of us, regardless of whether we are citizens or residents, documented or undocumented, are entitled to due process under the Constitution of the United States of America. And that is not what is happening here. In fact, the Trump administration is ratcheting up the inhumane activity as recently as separating small children from their mothers and sending them to separate detention camps as a deterrent to other people coming to the United States. This is a horrible situation. We need to get sanity in Congress. We need to get the Republicans out of there. We need to take the Senate back. We need to take the White House back in 2020 and bring back sanity and humanity.
Thank you. Dr. Keirstead, the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to an attorney in criminal proceedings, including a public defender for criminal defendants who cannot afford an attorney. There is no right to a government-appointed attorney in deportation proceedings, even if the immigrant detainee cannot afford an attorney. This can result in people being detained for years without an attorney to represent them. How would you address this in Congress?
You know, I've looked at this issue and I'm appalled by it. You know, we've got an administration that has had disparaging remarks, shithole, Haitian, El Salvador, African continents, you know, disparaging entire populations. This is nothing but racism. We've had that same president tell us that those individuals from those countries are dangerous. These deportation laws that are now becoming laws, expansion of these racist deportation laws, it's nothing more than glorified and made concrete ethnic cleansing. We can't do this. We've got to stand up. And so I would absolutely provide criminal defense for deportation, so criminal lawyers and lawyers for deported individuals.
Thank you.
We have to treat them the same way.
Thank you. Mr. Siddiqui, California's SB 54 forbids Californian law enforcement from sharing information with federal authorities about undocumented immigrants, with some limitations. Just this evening, as you may have heard, I got a notification from the Washington Post on my drive on the way over here The Trump administration announced it is suing California over SB 54 and so-called sanctuary cities. Do you believe SB 54 strikes the proper balance between protecting undocumented immigrants in our state without jeopardizing the safety of Californians? And how would you respond to these efforts, to congressional efforts to withdraw immigration enforcement funding from California or other states that enact similar legislation?
I do. Thank you for that question. I understand that U.S. Attorney Jeff Sessions Attorney General is coming into California tomorrow to initiate the lawsuit. When I learned this, and I know all those thumbs down are for Sessions, not me. I fully support California law ensuring and protecting a sanctuary state. No documented or undocumented individual in our country should live in fear. How I would address this in Congress, I would lobby hard with all of our fellow representatives in Washington, D.C. to take a look at California as a role model for respecting all of our citizens. Not just the DACAs, not just the Dreamers, but all the other 11 million throughout our nation. We cannot forget about them.
Thank you. Ms. Oatman, in the past few months, the administration terminated the temporary protected status program for El Salvador, Haiti, Sudan, and Nicaragua. Program participants residing in Orange County, including approximately 1,000 Haitian refugees, are now at risk of deportation. What would you do as an elected official to help those people living in this county?
Oh my gosh, yeah. This came up in the last debate, and in fact, it breaks my heart that we have so many hardworking citizens here working, raising their families. Some of them, most of them have been here for 10, 20 years. They're well established in our community that came here under temporary protected status. And now suddenly, on a whim, Trump has decided to revoke that and send them all home to San Salvador and Haiti. And it just breaks my heart. So when I get to Congress, I will do whatever I can to make sure that we fight that revocation of temporary protected status against Haitians and San Salvadorans, in addition to some of the other countries as well.
Thank you. This is the final two-candidate question. This will be Mr. Rouda and Mr. Kotick. 6 months ago, President Trump reversed the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy, or DACA. While yesterday was the deadline for Congress to act, the courts have temporarily stalled the deportation of the DACA recipients, and Congress has not yet voted on any DACA bill. If elected, would you vote for a bill that allowed DACA recipients to stay in the United States with a path to citizenship if the bill also included trade-offs, such as funding for a border wall, reduction in sponsored immigration programs, or ending the family reunification programs? What compromises are you willing to make to protect DACA recipients from deportation? And let's start with Mr. Kotick, because Mr. Rouda kind of addressed that in the last issue as well. Go ahead.
So I think one of the things that we need to be doing is the issue that we have with immigration as a whole, and I will get to DACA in a minute, is that on the Republican side of the aisle, all they see is dollars and cents. They see the opportunity cost of losing jobs. And that's what they think this is. I think we need to translate our vocabulary as passionate Democrats or independents to talk about not only the dignity and the human rights and the opportunities that these Dreamers and other undocumented immigrants deserve, but also help people understand what they're missing. For example, if DACA lapsed, which right now, even though there is protections, we're going to have anywhere from 425 to 1,000 people, I believe it's per day, losing their protected status. But what does that actually mean? Over the course of a year, that means that Orange County, actually the 48th district solely, will lose $200 million in GDP. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about the conversation when we say that we're going to be losing anywhere between 5 to 10% of our workforce if we have mass deportation of our undocumented immigrant community. Those are the conversations that we need to be having, because those are real economic impacts that will cripple our economy. In regards to DACA, I believe in a Clean Dream Act. I'm not having much of a discussion with you, am I?
No.
I believe in a Clean Dream Act, and I think there are things that we need to be doing. If we want to waste, to Harley's point, if we want to waste $18 billion on a wall, go do it. It's not going to be built, but I actually believe in investing in technological border security that doesn't look like ancient China, but instead looks like a modern, up-to-date world like we should be living in.
Thank you, Michael. And I think it's important to level set what we're talking about here, because there's a difference between DACA and Dreamers, and DAPA as well, the parents of those kids. Dreamers, the number I think is around about 1.5 million, and DACA I think is around 800,000. DACA is simply the people who have signed up under the DREAM Act to begin that process. So I'd prefer that we look at all Dreamers when we're talking about bringing them in with a path towards citizenship. And Andrea, you talked about, what are some of the other issues or concessions that could be on the table. And one of the hot topics is chain migration. And chain migration has two different applicability. One is for those who have received permanent resident status. Individuals who are permanent residents but not citizens have the ability to bring their underage children and their spouse into the United States to join them. Those that have become citizens of the United States have that same opportunity, but they also have the opportunity to bring in their adult children and siblings and parents. The discussion for some people in our country is that chain migration, especially for those who have received citizenship, is too broad. And while I think that Melania would certainly want the opportunity to bring her sister and her parents here, there are certain people within the Republican Party that don't agree with that. It is something that requires a robust conversation, and ultimately I want to focus our efforts now on the 11 million people that are here in the United States, over half of them who have been here 10 years or more. I think 85% of them have been 5 years or more. I think our first item that we need to focus on is providing a path for citizenship, not just for the Dreamers, but those other undocumented immigrants who have proven day in and day out that they are strong citizens and representatives of the United States, that they create jobs, they pay taxes, they are law-abiding residents. Let's make them citizens. Michael?
How are we at time? 52 seconds. I think one thing that's important, because the immigration topic is incredibly complex, is we have to recognize we talk a lot about a path to citizenship. And a lot of times, I know early before I started running, I was like, yeah, put them on the path. Let's go. There is no path. There is no path. We are talking about a fundamental innovation that needs to happen, and we need to rework our entire immigration system. Because today, there is no path and there is no line. So if any Republican friends say they should wait in line like everyone else, there is no line.
True.
We need to get going, and we need to get them on a path to citizenship, and we need to commit together to create it.
And you can tell that we are all first-time candidates, because all of us, if we were, basically good long-term elected officials, we would have taken the full 5 minutes and never given the microphone over to anybody else.
Well, we'll take advantage of it and get to ask a few more questions here. So this next question is for Dr. Keirstead, and I'm going to ask Mr. Rouda and Mr. Siddiqui as well. In 1944, the Supreme Court decided Korematsu versus United States, holding that American citizens of Japanese descent could be imprisoned in the interest of national security. This decision has never been overturned. There are people now advocating for internment of Muslims. What will you do in Congress to ensure that the U.S. government never interns U.S. citizens for their race, religion, orientation, origin, or any other status?
Very, very good question.
Thank you.
It starts with rescinding the various sins that the Trump administration has put on detaining individuals of color, of just anyone that doesn't have any status in this country, and start a path to citizenship. We have to overturn that Japanese internship law that's never been taken down. I realize that. So it's a relic of another time that needs to be taken out and made a precedent of.
Mr. Rouda?
What often goes unnoticed is we certainly all are very familiar with the Japanese internment camps. during World War II. But post-World War II was a Mexican expatriation, where we sent Mexicans back across the border, including citizens of the United States of Mexican ancestry. So unfortunately, as great as our country is in many ways, we certainly have a few black eyes in how we have handled our citizens and immigrants in this country. And I believe everyone on the stage is fully committed to making sure that the sins of the past do not occur in the future.
And Mr. Siddiqui?
Thank you. At the time of war, our Constitution takes a beating. And World War II was no exception. But I think one thing that we need to do is we need to learn from our past and not repeat those same mistakes. You have a president right now who's calling for a complete and utter shutdown of Muslims entering into the United States. And it is awe-inspiring to see the Japanese American community step forward in support of the Muslim American community. We cannot allow any president to ban anyone based on religion, national origin, ethnicity, or color. Our Constitution mandates that we treat all men and women equal. In Congress, what I will do is I will personally draft legislation that will be brought forward through the Japanese American community, the Muslim American community, and I'm sure all the other communities will come together and get that bill passed to ensure that that never happens again. I got into a very heated debate with President Obama about this very issue, about national security versus constitutional rights. And I'm proud to say that every time after that I would see President Obama, he would call me the lawyer, because he knew I would champion the cause of constitutional rights.
Thank you. This is the last question before we move on to the candidates' questions to each other. Mr. Rouda, human trafficking is an estimated $32 billion a year global criminal industry. The State Department estimates 14,500 to 17,500 people are trafficked into the U.S. every year. Between 2010 and 2012, California's task forces identified nearly 1,300 victims here in California alone, and those are just the identified victims. As a congressional representative, how will you combat human trafficking while protecting the victims who are often brought to the U.S. against their will or under false pretenses?
There's a lot of things we can do, and certainly this is just a scourge on society, and to believe that we have modern-day slavery occurring here in the United States is unfathomable, but unfortunately true. We need to make sure that we are securing ports and authorities and borders to make sure that trafficking can be stopped before it gets into the country. Second, we need to provide the legal resources to make sure that we are putting behind bars those who are causing the trafficking. Third, we need to hold social media platforms responsible for allowing the trafficking of these individuals under the guise that it's a sharing of information on a vertical, when reality is they know exactly what's there. They know they're profiting from the advertising dollars that are taking place, and we need to prevent that immediately. We also need to just raise the awareness of this issue. This is an issue that a lot of Americans don't even believe is going on, and we can pass legislation, but we've got to change minds and hearts around this as well, and that is educating the public as to what's going on.
Thank you. At this time, some of the candidates have prepared questions to ask some of the other candidates. We've given them each the opportunity to ask one question of one other candidate. And I'm going to just go down the line. Some of the candidates have decided not to ask a question, but I'll let them explain their reasoning on that. So let's start with Mr. Kotick.
This one's going to be short because I was going to ask Hans to clarify his comments on his immigration position. So Harley, nice job, my man. You're good. So I'll pass on and we can make up some time.
Okay, sounds good. Ms. Oatman?
Yes, the five of us have been on the campaign trail together here for almost a year in some cases. And I have to say that these are some amazing, admirable men up here on this stage. And so therefore, I have decided to decline asking any sort of comment that might provoke any sort of a negative thing. My belief is that we need to run positive campaigns, no Dem on Dem attacks in any way, shape, or form. So I believe that any one of us up here would make a fantastic member of Congress, and therefore I am going to pass.
Okay. Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Keirstead, Dr. Keirstead. The question, the Democratic Party platform and the current administration both agree that Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel. Do you agree or disagree with this position?
I agree. It has been something that has been actually a delay in moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Okay. And Dr. Keirstead, did you have a question
I have no
for anyone
questions.
else? No. And finally, Mr. Rouda.
One question. Mr. Keirstead, I was just curious, in the 2016 primary, were you Bernie or Hillary? Who did you vote for?
Was I Bernie or Hillary? Hillary.
2016
Oh, 16.
primary?
No. It would have been Hillary, but yeah.
So you voted for Hillary in the 2016 primary?
In the primary. I'm sorry. Primary election. No, I didn't vote.
And do you want to explain why?
You know, I missed a vote. I missed that vote. So good catch, Harley. I
think you've actually missed every primary.
I have. So I've lived in the United States for 8 years, and 18 years, sorry, and I've missed some votes. I missed the primaries. I've been working on, like a lot of people, I've been busy, and you know, I've put my cancer research above a lot. It's not an excuse at all, and I'm very sorry I missed those things. Don't really have an excuse for it.
I don't want to end on a bad note here completely. So I do want to thank all of you for being here and for answering all the questions. Loved getting the insight from everyone on the foreign policy and immigration issues. I'm going to turn this over to Aaron in just a minute here, but I do want to remind everybody you were given these sheets of paper. Please make sure you fill it out, decide who won the debate tonight, and what order they came in. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Everybody sit down. We need closing. Sorry, my brain. So at this time, so that's your reminder. I won't say it again. At this time, each person's going to get a 90-second closing, and we'll go in reverse order of VSS score. So, Mr. Kotick, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much for a great debate. Thank you all for being here. And thank you all. It was exceptional. Thanks. No clapping.
They're not allowed to.
So we didn't really get to touch at all, basically, on trade. And I'd like to use the last 90 seconds to talk a little bit about trade, because I think it actually is one of the most staggering issues that could be facing us over the course of the next year, especially with the administration's position on trade. So let's clarify a couple things. First of all, trade wars are not easy to win. And Gary Cohn's resignation is symbolic of the fact that we have some tough and tumultuous times ahead. Here's what we don't know. We don't know if it's real. We don't know the target amounts. What I would say is look at it with a level of skepticism, because every trade war is going to affect each and every one of us. It's going to affect us from the price that we pay in goods. It's going to affect us from potential inflation. It's going to protect us from interest rates. We need someone who is going to go to Congress that understands the inner workings of trade, because that is what Congress needs to step up to the plate and do a whole lot more of, because our cost of living is at stake, especially here in Orange County, if we don't handle this right. And Donald Trump obviously doesn't understand the impacts of foreign trade and foreign relations. Thank you all very much for being here, and it was an excellent evening. Thank you.
Y'all can clap for this, the end. Yeah, you guys can clap. Good job. Miss Oatman, you can go next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. I've recently received an endorsement from an amazing woman, Marianne Williamson, and I want to quote from her. "The love that will save the world is a love that cares as much about other people's children as we care about our own." So we're here tonight talking about immigration and foreign policy, but we can't forget we're not just talking about facts and figures. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about people. And as a mother, I see the world through the effect that our policies have on our children. When we're talking about ICE raids and deportation, my heart aches for those children in our district that are afraid to go to sleep at night, fearing that maybe one or both of their parents may be gone in the morning, even if they've served in the military. When we're talking about barely masked racism in the current anti-immigration policies, my heart aches for my sisters of color, whose kids are targeted and bullied because of the color of their skin. When we see these absurd tweets from Trump bragging about the size of nuclear buttons, my heart fears for our young men and women who potentially could fight and die in another needless war. I know that America can only be great again when America is demanding the best of herself, at home and abroad, when America is safe and equitable for all of our children. Choose a representative who will represent you and make all of her decisions in Washington as a mother fighting fiercely to protect her children, all of her children, like her own. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oatman. Omar, the lawyer, can you go next?
Thank you. We are in unstable times. Breaking news interrupts breaking news. From the rise of China to Russia to the instability in the Middle East, regional clashes in South China Sea, and the threat of climate change and our geopolitical order and the world maps are all in flux. In a dangerous, changing world, you need a congressman who understands national security. You need a congressman who is on that front line every day, someone who works with the intelligence community, someone who can stand up to a president, someone who can stand up to a president who puts us at risk every day, even by his very tweets, a congressman ready for the job on day one. I am that candidate. No amount of money can buy that experience. As a son of an immigrant father who crossed halfway across the world on board the Queen Mary with little money in his pocket but hope in his heart, my parents worked hard for this American dream. And I want to pass that dream on to my daughters for a safer America. I want to pass that on to you and to all of our children. When people question the sound of my name, my skin color, or my faith, I'm reminded of the work we still have to do. But I carry what my father had when he first saw the Statue of Liberty on the decks when he came. That's hope. Please join my mission. Please join my team. I need your vote and I need your support because I cannot do this alone. I'm not asking that you stand with me, but rather I'm asking that you let me stand with you. My campaign motto is we are one nation with one destiny, and united together we can rise. Please visit omarinthehouse.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Dr. Keirstead.
Well, listen, it's really been a real pleasure tonight. I've enjoyed everything except that last question. And, listen, I've been just honored to be in this race. It has just been a focusing of my attentions and my passions for everything that this nation stands here since I immigrated here and walked up my version of this wonderful country and American dream that we've got. I have vowed since day one to run a clean campaign, and that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to keep this professional, I'm trying to keep this national, and I'm trying to keep this at a district-worthy level of you, worthy of you. I've been honored to receive more endorsements than any other candidate on this stage. I am endorsed by sitting congressmen. I'm the only one to be so. I was honored to receive the California Democratic Party endorsement, and I have more support from more elected officials than anyone else. And I'm just honored to have had the opportunity to get to know these individuals, to talk to them, and to see what they want, and to see what you want. My promise to you is that I will be here to fight Trump and fight Rohrabacher, that I will be here to tune your healthcare system and push for single payer, and that I will be here to protect your environment with whatever leverage and power that I have on that hill. I will be turning it right back here onto this district, and I will be putting issues in front of everything, progress before politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Keirstead.
Thank you.
And last words from Harley. Rouda. Take it away.
I started this campaign a year ago, standing up in front of 700 people in Newport Dunes, candidly a little scared, wasn't sure what I was getting into. And I know that I'm a better candidate today than I was then, and I'll be a better candidate tomorrow, and I'll be a great elected official. And I'm so impressed with how far this campaign has come because of you. Today, we have tens of thousands of followers, donors, and supporters across the district and across the country. This is a true grassroots movement. I am not an establishment candidate. I am fighting for you day in and day out for an entire year now, and I'll do it until November and when I beat Rohrabacher. And I'm proud of the fact, too, that we have 3 times as many endorsements from the labor community than any other candidate up here, including the California Nurses Association. They recognize that I have the passion and the leadership to win this seat. And that's what you need. You need somebody that's got the passion and the leadership to do this. And frankly, they better be able to take a punch and throw a punch along the way. Because it's going to get real ugly between the primary and general. And I can't wait to throw punches at Rohrabacher. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the candidates for the 48th District. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you. Nice job, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. So really quickly, I just want to wrap a couple things up. First off, you guys should have been handed some pamphlets so that you guys can fill in the surveys about the straw poll. Please fill those out before you leave. Do not leave and make sure that they're filled out because we want to see what happened, what you guys thought about the debates. Secondly,
they're more up there. So.
Secondly, what's most important is if you're either watching at home on YouTube, in the description, you can also fill out the survey there. The next thing is our next debate is on April 3rd, and the debate after that will be April 23rd. We're still using the voter support score to determine who's going to be showing up April 23rd, so we need you guys to go out and support these wonderful candidates who are here tonight, or if there are other candidates who are not here tonight that you want to support, you support them as well. Finally, I would like you guys to give a round of applause to Andrea and her fact-checking team. They did amazing work, and they crafted these questions based off of you guys' questions, and I think that they did a really great job. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. Have a great night. The candidates will be outside at the tables, so you can go talk to them there.